Okay, so today we're going to dive into something pretty heavy, something that it's going to be tough to really grasp, honestly. We're talking about the Sylvia Likens case.
Yeah, the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens back
Yeah.
in 1965. Definitely not light material, but I think it's important to try and understand what led to this tragedy. How did it all unfold?
Absolutely. And we've got a lot of material to go through for this, right? News articles, court transcripts from the trial, historical accounts.
Yeah, that's right. We'll stick to those, just the facts, trying to put together the pieces without, without sensationalizing anything, just trying to understand what happened, who was involved, that sort of thing.
Definitely. And it's important to acknowledge that the details are, well, incredibly sensitive and disturbing. So we're going to focus on the information from those sources, no opinions or anything beyond what's documented, just the facts.
Right. So maybe a good place to start would be with Sylvia and her family, who she was before all of this.
Makes sense. So Sylvia Marie Likens, born January 3, 1949. Her parents, Lester and Elizabeth Likens, they worked in carnivals, traveling a lot.
And it sounds like their marriage was, pretty unstable. They moved around a lot for work and always seemed to be struggling financially.
Right. And Sylvia was one of 5 kids. She had older twins, Daniel and Diana, and younger twins, Benny and Jenny.
And Jenny had polio, right, which meant she wore a leg brace. So I imagine that made her especially vulnerable in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, from what the sources say, Sylvia was a friendly, outgoing teenager. Her friends called her Cookie. She was described as, like, confident and very protective of Jenny.
Interesting. There's also a detail about her being self-conscious about a missing front tooth. Apparently, she'd try to hide it when she smiled. Kind of a small detail, but it gives you a glimpse into her personality, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Now, this whole thing started because in July of 65, Sylvia and Jenny's mother was jailed for shoplifting.
Oh, wow. And so what, their dad couldn't take care of them?
Right. So their father, Lester, made an arrangement for them to stay with this woman, Gertrude Banisevsky.
Oh, Anisevsky. Yeah.
Yeah. And the girls actually knew her daughters, Paula and Stephanie, from school. So it probably seemed like, I don't know, maybe a familiar, safe place at first.
And how old were Paula and Stephanie?
Paula was 17 and Stephanie was 15 at the time.
Right. Okay. And what was the deal? Was he, like, paying her to take care of them?
Exactly. He was supposed to pay her $20 a week until he and their mother could come back for them, which was supposed to be sometime in November.
So not a permanent thing, at least in theory. But okay, so who was this Gertrude Banisowski? What's her story?
Well, she was born Gertrude Nadine Van Fossen on September 19th, 1928. Working class background, her father died young from a heart attack.
Okay, so kind of a tough start. And what about her own family, her kids?
She had a bunch of kids, actually. Paula and Stephanie, like we said, but also John Marie, Shirley, James. And then the youngest, Dennis Lee Wright Jr., who was just a baby, like 1 year old.
Wow, that's a lot of kids to be responsible for, especially in 1965.
Yeah, and her personal life seems like it was pretty chaotic.
What do you mean?
Well, she'd been married 3 times, divorced twice, all with the same man, this guy named John Banisevsky.
Oh, wow, on again, off again kind of thing.
Seems like it. And then she was briefly married to another guy, Edward Guthrie.
Oh,
And on top of all that, she was in this relationship with Dennis Lee Wright, the father of her youngest.
so a lot of relationships.
Mm.
Any indication of how those went?
Some sources mention physical abuse happening in some of those relationships.
Oh, boy. Okay, that's a lot to unpack. And physically, mentally, where was Gertrude at this point in her life?
Well, according to what we have, she was underweight, like really thin, about 100 pounds.
Hmm.
She had asthma, smoked a lot, and was struggling with pretty serious depression.
I can see how all that could contribute to some poor decisions, but of course not an excuse for what happened.
Of course not, but it does add some context. I mean, she'd also just had a miscarriage and was financially dependent on like sporadic help from her ex-husband and odd jobs. She was under a lot of pressure.
So you got Sylvia and Jenny moving into this house with this woman who's, well, clearly dealing with a lot herself.
Hmm.
How did it start? Were things bad right away?
Actually, no. The first few weeks seemed to have been relatively normal. Sylvia even sang songs with Stephanie, helped with chores around the house.
Really?
Yeah, they even went to Sunday school with the Benisevsky kids. It wasn't until later that things started to go really wrong.
So what changed? What was the trigger?
It seems like the first instances of abuse were connected to the boarding payments.
Oh, the money from their dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the $20 a week from Lester Likens didn't show up consistently, Gertrude started taking her frustration out on the girls.
Oh, no.
And it began with beatings, using a paddle. There's this quote from one source where she said, "Well, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing."
Wow, that's chilling. Right from the start, it seems like she resented having them there.
Yeah, definitely. And then by mid-August, the abuse became much more focused on Sylvia specifically.
Hmm.
Any idea why?
It's hard to say for sure, but the sources point to jealousy as a possible reason. Gertrude, with all her own struggles, might have envied Sylvia's youth, her looks.
Yeah, I can see that, sadly.
So the abuse became more frequent, and it was brutal. Beatings, starvation, Sylvia was forced to eat like leftovers and even spoiled food from the trash.
Oh.
There was even a time she was accused of stealing candy that she'd actually bought herself.
Just creating these situations to punish her for no reason.
Exactly. It's like Gertrude was looking for any excuse to hurt her. And the things they did to humiliate Sylvia, it's hard to even talk about.
Yeah.
Like one time, Sylvia mentioned an old boyfriend she had from when they lived in California.
Mm.
Just an innocent comment.
Teenagers talk about those things. Exactly. But Gertrude got so angry, she started questioning Sylvia, asking if she'd done anything with this boy. And when Sylvia didn't really answer, she kicked her right in the genital.
Oh, God. That's terrible.
And then Paula, Gertrude's daughter, she was pregnant at the time, and apparently she got jealous too.
Jealous of Sylvia.
It seems that way. She attacked Sylvia, knocked her to the floor, and yelled, "You ain't fit to sit in a chair." It's just this escalating cycle of cruelty.
Horrible. And was Jenny being treated this way too?
Not to the same extent. It seemed like most of the abuse was directed at Sylvia, but there was this one incident, a forced feeding thing, that involved both of them.
Oh, no. What happened?
Gertrude, Paula, and this neighbor boy, Randy Lepper, they forced Sylvia to eat this hot dog that was covered in condiments, and when she threw up, they made her eat her own vomit.
Oh, my God. That's beyond cruel, just degrading and dehumanizing.
It really is. And I think at some point, Sylvia must have felt so desperate, so trapped that she tried to fight back in the only way she could think of.
What did she do?
She spread a rumor at school
About what?
that Paula and Stephanie were prostitutes.
Oh, wow.
We don't know for sure if it was true, but the consequences for Sylvia were immediate and brutal.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Stephanie's boyfriend, this guy named Coy Hubbard, he heard about it and attacked Sylvia. Slapped her, slammed her head against the wall, threw her to the ground, and then Gertrude beat her with a paddle as punishment.
So any attempt to defend herself, to get help, just backfired horribly.
It really did, and the physical violence just kept getting worse. Paula actually broke her own wrist beating Sylvia.
You're kidding.
Nope. And even with her wrist in a cast, she continued to beat Sylvia, focusing on her face, her teeth, her eyes, like they were trying to destroy her.
And Gertrude, was she doing anything to stop this?
Not only was she not stopping it, she was encouraging it. She constantly accused Sylvia of being promiscuous, a prostitute, even though there's no evidence of that. And she would force Jenny to hit Sylvia too, beating Jenny if she didn't do it. It's like she was trying to break the bond between the sisters, to completely isolate Sylvia.
Just psychological torture on top of everything else. So at this point, are we talking like late summer, early fall of 65?
Right. And it was around this time that things took another turn, a really disturbing one. Other kids from the neighborhood started getting involved.
Oh, no.
Gertrude actually encouraged it. She let them come over and I don't know, use Sylvia as a punching bag, basically.
Oh, could she?
I don't know. But these kids, they beat her, they burned her with cigarettes. There are accounts of over 100 cigarette burns on her body. They cut her, injured her genitals. It was horrific.
It's unimaginable cruelty. Did anyone try to stop I mean, someone had to have seen something, right?
You would think so, but it seems like Gertrude had created this atmosphere of fear, of silence, and the kids, they were probably scared of her too, afraid of what would happen if they spoke up.
Yeah, that makes sense, unfortunately. So Sylvia's trapped, suffering this relentless abuse, no one to turn to. What happened next?
Well, one particularly awful episode involved Sylvia being forced to strip naked in the living room.
In front of everyone?
Yes. And then they forced her to insert a glass Pepsi bottle into herself.
Oh, my God. I don't even have words for that. That's just so...
I know. It's pure evil. And Gertrude, she said she did it to prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are. It was all about control, about humiliating and degrading Sylvia and terrorizing Jenny into silence.
I just can't. Okay, so how did it escalate from there?
Well, at one point, Sylvia admitted to stealing a gym suit from school. She said she did it because Gertrude wouldn't buy her one, and the punishment for that was extreme, even by Gertrude's standards.
What did she do?
She whipped Sylvia with a police belt, brutally, and then she burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches.
Jesus, it's like she was trying to break her, piece by piece.
It really seems that way. And a few days later, she whipped Jenny too, just for supposedly stealing a tennis shoe.
It's just senseless violence.
Huh.
So, at this point, were Sylvia and Jenny completely isolated? Did they have any contact with the outside world?
They were pretty much cut off from everyone. They were terrified to report the abuse, thinking it would only make things worse.
I can't imagine the fear they must have been living with.
And Gertrude reinforced that fear, specifically threatening Jenny with the same kind of torture if she ever told anyone what was happening.
So they were trapped. What about their parents? Did they ever visit?
They did. They came a few times during this period, in July, August, and then again in October.
And did they not see what was happening?
It seems like Sylvia and Jenny tried to hide it from them. Maybe they were afraid of what Gertrude would do if they said anything, or maybe they still had some hope that their parents would rescue them, that things would get better.
It's heartbreaking to think about the missed opportunities, the what-ifs.
It really is. There was one time in September when the girls managed to tell their older sister, Diana, about the abuse. They ran into her in a park.
Did they tell her everything?
They told her that Sylvia was being hurt, being punished for things she hadn't done, but they didn't give her the address.
So Diana didn't know where to find them.
Right. And it seems like she didn't fully believe them at first, maybe couldn't comprehend the level of cruelty they were describing. It's hard to wrap your head around something so horrific.
Yeah, I can understand that. But you'd think that even a hint of something being wrong would be enough to raise a red flag.
You'd hope so. But there were other times when people had a chance to help and didn't. Like there was this incident with a sandwich. Diana gave Sylvia a sandwich when she saw her in the park again.
Okay.
And Gertrude's daughter, Marie, she told her mom about it.
Yeah.
And Gertrude, instead of being grateful that someone was trying to help, she accused Sylvia of being greedy. And she punished her, made her take a scalding hot bath.
Okay.
Yeah. And when Sylvia fainted, she slammed her head against the tub.
It's just unfathomable. How could anyone do that to a child?
It's monstrous. And it's not like no one outside the house knew what was happening. There was even an anonymous report made to Sylvia's school.
Really? Who reported it?
The father of one of the neighborhood boys. He'd heard about what was going on and reported that a girl with open sores was living at the Benisevsky house.
So someone tried to get help.
They did, but it didn't go anywhere. A school nurse visited, but Gertrude lied to her. She said Sylvia had run away and was just dirty and unhygienic.
And the nurse believed her.
Apparently so. There was no further investigation. It's a perfect example of how easily systems can fail, how abuse can slip through the cracks.
It's infuriating, knowing that someone tried to get help and it didn't reach her.
I know. And even the neighbors, some of them saw what was happening. This couple, Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion, they lived nearby and saw Paula abusing Sylvia on a couple of occasions. They even heard Paula bragging about it.
But they didn't do anything.
They said they noticed Sylvia seemed zombified, but they didn't report it.
Why not? I don't understand.
I don't know. Fear, maybe? Apathy?
Yeah.
The sense that it wasn't their problem. It's a question that haunts this case. Why so many people knew, to some extent, what was happening and did nothing to stop it.
Yeah. It's disturbing.
Yeah.
What about Diana, Sylvia's older sister? Did she ever find out where they were living?
She did, eventually. And she tried to visit, around the beginning of October.
And what happened?
Gertrude wouldn't let her in. She claimed that the girls' parents had given her permission to keep them isolated. Later, Diana ran into Jenny, but Jenny was too scared to say anything about Sylvia. It's just another example of the power and control Gertrude had over those girls.
So by this point, we're talking October 1965. What happened next?
Well, it seems like Sylvia's spirit was finally breaking. The constant abuse, the neglect, it was all taking its toll. She started wetting herself.
Oh, no. And I bet Gertrude punished her for that.
You bet. She threw Sylvia in the basement and tied her up, and she stayed there, often naked, rarely fed, deprived of water.
The basement became her prison.
Exactly, and Gertrude just kept manipulating everyone around her, turning them against Sylvia. She'd lie to her own kids, saying Sylvia had insulted them, hoping to provoke them into hurting her.
God. It's like she was orchestrating the whole thing, pitting them against each other.
And she'd do these awful things like holding a knife to Sylvia, challenging her to fight back. When Sylvia said she didn't know how to fight, Gertrude cut her leg.
What was the point of that?
It's hard to say, but it seems like it was all about humiliation, control, showing Sylvia that she had absolutely no power in that situation.
So twisted. Was there any let up in the abuse?
Not really. Maybe a brief pause when the family was watching TV, but for the most part, the torment was relentless.
And the other kids were still involved.
Oh, yeah. Gertrude charged them money to come over and participate in the abuse.
Seriously.
Yeah, they'd beat Sylvia, burn her, scald her. It's horrifying to think that these kids, some of them barely teenagers, were so desensitized to violence, so willing to inflict pain on another human being.
It's a whole other level of messed up. And Sylvia, I can't even imagine what she must have been going through at this point.
I know, it's almost too much to bear, but we have to talk about it. She was forced to eat her own feces and drink her own urine. Gertrude's son, John Jr., he'd torment her with food, offering her soup, and then snatching it away before she could eat it. One night, she is allowed to sleep upstairs but wet the bed. Gertrude's punishment, forcing her to insert a Coca-Cola bottle into herself.
Oh my God, it just keeps getting worse.
And then came the branding. Gertrude decided to carve words into Sylvia's stomach with a heated needle.
No.
She started carving, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it."
Oh, that's sick.
When she couldn't finish it, she made one of the neighborhood kids, Richard Hobbs, complete it.
She made him do it.
Yes. And then she and her daughter Shirley burned the letter S onto Sylvia's chest using a hot bolt.
Yeah, it's beyond words. The level of cruelty is just.
I know. And it wasn't just physical. The psychological torture was just as bad. Gertrude taunted Sylvia, telling her she'd never be able to marry because of the words carved on her body.
God.
Sylvia just said, "I guess there's nothing I can do." And that night, she told Jenny she knew she was going to die. She'd given up hope.
And what was Gertrude planning to do? Was she going to let her die in the basement?
No. She actually had this plan to get rid of Sylvia, to make it look like she'd run away and been killed by someone else.
So premeditated.
She made Sylvia write a letter dictating the story about how she'd run away and been abused by local boys.
Jesus.
And then she was going to have John Jr. and Jenny take Sylvia to this wooded area nearby called Jimmy's Forest and leave her there to die.
Just abandon her.
That was the plan.
So what happened? How did it actually end?
Well, on October 24th, Gertrude forced Sylvia to eat crackers and beat her again. And then on the 25th, Sylvia overheard them talking about taking her to the woods. She tried to escape.
Did she get out?
No, they caught her and beat her so badly they bent a curtain rod, hitting her in the face. That night, neighbors heard Sylvia screaming for help from the basement, but no one called the police.
No one helped her.
No. And by the next morning, Sylvia was barely alive. She couldn't speak clearly, couldn't move. Gertrude tried to feed her, but she couldn't even swallow. They put her back in the basement.
Oh, God.
She was delirious, couldn't even say the alphabet past the first few letters. She'd soiled herself, but they made her clean it up. In her last moment, she could barely identify who was hurting her.
How did she die?
Well, she couldn't even bite into a pear they gave her, said her teeth felt loose. Jenny left for a little while to do some gardening for the neighbors, and while she was gone, John Jr. sprayed Sylvia with the garden hose. She tried to get out the basement, collapsed, and Gertrude stomped on her head.
She stomped on her head.
Yes. And later that afternoon, Richard Hobbs, the kid who'd helped with the branding, he found Stephanie crying in the basement with Sylvia. They tried to clean her up, but it was too late. Sylvia's last words were, "Daddy was here," and that she wanted to go home.
God, how awful.
Stephanie tried to revive her, but Sylvia wasn't breathing. Gertrude kept denying she was dead. Sylvia Likens died on October 26, 1965. She was 16 years old.
And what happened then? What about Gertrude and the others?
Well, Gertrude, she beat Sylvia's dead body, calling her a faker. Then she panicked and told Hobbs to call the police.
I can't even imagine the scene the police walked into.
It must have been horrific. They found Sylvia's body so emaciated and covered in wounds. They found the letter Gertrude had forced her to write. And Gertrude, she lied, made up this whole story about Sylvia being a runaway who'd gotten mixed up with bad kids.
And the others, did they go along with it?
Most of them did, at least at first. Paula even told Jenny that if she wanted to stay with them, they'd treat her like their own sister. Chilling.
Trying to control her, even after Sylvia was dead.
But thankfully, Jenny finally told the truth. She whispered to the police that she'd tell them everything if they got her away from there. And her testimony, along with the physical evidence, it was enough to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, John Jr., Hobbs, and Hubbard.
Did they arrest the other kids too? The ones who participated in the abuse?
They did. A lot of the neighborhood kids were arrested, but the focus was on Gertrude and the ones who were directly involved in Sylvia's death.
And what about the autopsy? What did they find?
It was devastating. Sylvia's body had over 150 wounds. She was severely malnourished, covered in burns, bruises, cuts. There was muscle and nerve damage, evidence of sexual assault.
It's hard to even listen to this.
I know, it's horrific. The coroner said the cause of death was a subdural hematoma, which is bleeding in the brain, and shock, made worse by the malnutrition. Sylvia's funeral was on October 29th in Lebanon, Indiana.
And what happened to Gertrude and the others? Did they go to trial?
They did. In December of 65, Gertrude, Paula, John Jr., Hobbs, and Hubbard were indicted for first-degree murder. Stephanie was released and agreed to testify against the others.
So what happened at the trial?
Well, it was a long and complicated process. The prosecution wanted the death penalty. They presented all the evidence, the medical reports, the witness testimonies. Jenny testified, described everything that had happened to Sylvia. The deputy coroner described the extent of her suffering.
It must have been hard for Jenny to relive all of that.
I can't imagine. And some of the neighbors testified too, corroborating the abuse. Even Gertrude's own daughter, Marie, testified against her and her siblings.
Wow. So what was the defense's strategy?
Well, they tried a few different things. Gertrude's lawyers claimed she was insane, not responsible for her actions. Paula's lawyers tried to downplay her role, saying she was just following her mother's orders. The lawyers for the boys, they argued that they were young and impressionable, hadn't intended to kill Sylvia.
And what about Gertrude? Did she ever admit to what she did?
No. She denied responsibility, blamed her medication, said she couldn't remember a lot of what happened.
So what was the verdict?
The jury deliberated for 14 hours. Gertrude is found guilty of first-degree murder, but the jury recommended life in prison instead of the death penalty. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John Jr. were found guilty of manslaughter.
Manslaughter. That doesn't seem like enough.
I know, but that was the verdict. But the legal battle wasn't over yet.
What happened?
In 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court overturned Gertrude and Paula's convictions
Why?
because they hadn't been granted a change of venue or separate trials. So Paula ended up pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter in a new trial and was paroled in 1972. And Gertrude, she was retried and convicted of first-degree murder again, sentenced to life in prison.
So she went back to prison. What about the others? What happened to them after the trial?
Well, Richard Hobbs died of lung cancer a few years after he was paroled. Coy Hubbard, he ended up in trouble with the law again and died of a heart attack in 2007. John Jr., he changed his name, became a lay minister, and actually admitted that he should have gotten a harsher sentence. He died of diabetes in 2005.
And what about the girls, Paula and Stephanie?
Paula changed her identity, got married, and had kids. She even worked as a school counselor for a while, but she was fired when her past came out. Stephanie also changed her name, became a teacher, got married, and had kids. The younger Benisevsky children were put in foster care, and their last names were changed.
And Jenny.
She lived the rest of her life with the trauma of what happened. She got married, had kids, but she always struggled with anxiety and nightmares. She died of a heart attack in 2004.
So sad. She was a victim too, just like Sylvia.
Absolutely. And the house where all this happened, the house at 3850 East New York Street, it stayed empty for years. They tried to turn it into a women's shelter, but it never worked out. It just sat there, a reminder of the horrors that took place inside.
It's almost like a physical manifestation of the trauma, just this empty, decaying space where such a terrible thing happened.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And this whole case, it really makes you think about the responsibility we all have